Talk to Ash Regan, MSP for Edinburgh Eastern at the Alba party up there. Ash, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
Don't know if you were invited to the Trump extravaganza last week, were you?
I wasn't, no.
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, I bet if you had, though, you might have put a couple of pictures out, which Keir Starmer completely forgot to do. I can't imagine why. He puts pictures out of him meeting everybody else.
Yeah, I think I do take part in some political meetings where it's more that you're trying to lay the groundwork for possible changes in legislation and things like that. And I never put those photos on social media, but type of thing, it's a formal ceremonial occasion. I think you probably would be okay to do that.
Well, he does it all the time, but anyway, we can talk about him until the cows come home. Let's talk about prisons instead, because funnily enough, we were just talking about a prison story just before this, a rather bizarre one, where a Brixton jailer apparently went home with the keys and they had to lock down the prison for 2 weeks. But you want to talk about this idea of trans women and women in prison, because it's been an issue this week, hasn't it, with Reform's new sort of spokesperson for prisons, Vanessa Frake. We had her on the other day. She came out and said that she thought trans women should be placed in prisons on a case-by-case basis, which sort of confused a lot of people and upset a lot of Reform voters.
Yes, it's very much a case of another week. Another political party seems to get very confused about the fact that they really do need to be upholding women's rights. So quite a new appointment, I believe, a new advisor for Reform. And as I understand it, this statement was made. Nigel, I think, was sitting there and appeared to agree with it and made a few comments around it. So I suppose my initial thoughts on that would be that the public probably thought Reform was at least one of the political parties that was taking a kind of a common sense approach to this, that they understood the issues, they knew they needed to protect women and they knew they needed to uphold the law. It seems as if that's not really the case now. If you really did understand the law in this area, you had empathy for, in this case, it's for female prisoners, and you were understood that you needed to uphold the law, because obviously we've had this Supreme Court judgment quite recently, which has put, this thing is entirely beyond clarity, is there for everybody to see. I'm surprised that Nigel in that moment didn't recognise that.
Yeah. I mean, I sort of have some sympathy for him, because when I spoke to Vanessa Frake, I'd seen her explaining it on another channel previous to the day that I spoke to her. And she basically said that, it's a very small number for a start, one, and two, obviously it depends on the situation. If some woman or some man who is a trans woman has just decided that he's a woman and has decided that he wants to be in a women's prison because he thinks he's a woman, then obviously she said that would probably not be somebody you'd put in a women's prison. But if it was somebody who had perhaps lived as a woman, even though was a biological man for 25, 30 years, you wouldn't want to put them in the male prison. That was kind of her logic, it seemed to me.
Well, the law's the law. So the law is saying that where there are single-sex spaces, that needs to be applied. So that would be single-sex. So it doesn't matter, how you dress or how you present or how you see yourself, what kind of clothes you wear, based on biology. So in that case, it would be, only women in the women's prison estate. And, if we're talking about risk assessments and we're talking about this idea of case-by-case basis, in Scotland, using that type of approach, we ended up with a double rapist in the women's estate. So that just shows...
Which is obviously completely mad. I've got a little clip, I think, of Sarah Pochin, the Runcorn MP from Reform. Let's see what she had to say.
I would like to clarify Reform UK's policy on transgender prisoners serving time in a female prison. I can assure all of you that under a Reform government, no biological male prisoner will ever serve time in a female prison. The safety of women will always be a priority for Reform.
So I guess they're going against what Vanessa Frake said, and to be fair, so did Nigel Farage in the end, and so did Richard Tice. I think they all put out statements, but there is this kind of grey area, because what Vanessa said to me was if the person, for example, the trans woman had some kind of surgery to become more woman-like, whatever it is, you couldn't put them in, she said, well, you couldn't put them in the male prison.
Well, no, that's complete nonsense. There is a policy in the male prison for vulnerable men, because there are other male prisoners that have vulnerabilities about them, which means that you wouldn't put them in the general population. Right. So they would be housed there. What we can't do is take vulnerable men and then decide that actually we're going to put them in the women's prison estate. that creates vulnerabilities for the female prisoners that are in. So yes, reform appear to be on full damage limitation mode right now.
Yes.
You know, to clarify, or should we say re-clarify their position on this issue. I think the public want clarity.
Yeah.
I
must say, when I saw what Vanessa Frake had said, I thought, oh, crikey, you know, she's not going to be doing that job for long. But she still seems to be doing it. So I mean, I don't know whether she's going to change her view, or whether they're going to do one of those, oh, we're a party that has different views. But they certainly seem to have clarified that their policy is that no trans woman will ever be in a women's prison.
Yes, we still in Scotland have male prisoners in the women's prison state. It's very difficult now to get the figures because the government made the decision, I think it was last year, that for political reasons they would stop publishing that information. So it's difficult, but we think somewhere in the region of between 3 and 5. Now, these prisoners are in for very serious offences, including murder. And so we are continuing our campaign up here to try to put pressure on the government and the Scottish Prison Service in order for them to comply with the law and move these prisoners back out into where they should be, which is in the male estate.
Because we also know, statistically speaking, that an awful lot of trans women prisoners are in prison for sexual offences, don't we?
They are a disproportionate number, which might lead you to think that some people convert to saying they have a trans identity after they're convicted for sex. But yes, going back to the surgery point, because I think sometimes the public have this impression that, you know, when you talk about somebody who's transgender, it means that they've had extensive surgeries and they've been on hormones and so on. The vast, vast majority of these trans prisoners will not have had any surgery, nor do they intend to. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it should be, as you say, pretty straightforward, but appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed.